I have to tell you, I've been listening to you, and I think we saw two different press conferences. From my perspective, I thought he was relaxed, he was funny, he was on point. He took the whole issue of the media, and he had a very candid conversation. This is the kind of conversation that I personally had with him a couple years ago, in which he said some version of this same thing that he said today, except he was more specific. And I honestly think what you miss here is that out here in the countryside, as it were, he comes across as being very candid, very dedicated to the job, very in command, and he's going to do what he can do to get his objectives accomplished. So I just think that there's a misreading here. I can tell you this minute that Rush Limbaugh is exulting over this on conservative talk radio, and there will be a huge positive response for the kind of things he said today.
And what about some of the the back and forth that he had with reporters? You used to work in the Reagan White House. Right. I guess some of the criticism will be, is that really presidential 4 weeks into a new term?
Well, I think this is going to be his presidential style. And, you know, every president brings to the office, no matter who they are, their own individual personal style. This is his. The American people have seen it on display for, what, the 18 months or whatever it was of that campaign, and they voted for it. So now they're going to see it for 4 years, and they're going to see more and more of it, I think.
So you think there's going to be more of these kinds of news conferences with what we call the mainstream news media actually allowed to ask questions?
I notice his dealing with our friend Jim Acosta. I mean, he didn't ignore him. He took his questions, he answered them honestly. There was a back and forth. That's all to the good. That's not bad. That's to the good.
Are you comfortable with the way he attacks the mainstream media? You heard that one question about the fundamental role of the news media in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I believe he's doing that. Wolf, I don't think it's any, I mean, and he touched on this to some degree, that the ratings of the media in general are very low. And I think since I had a column about this at Newsbusters on Saturday, since Spiro Agnew sort of brought this problem out back in, I think it was November of 1969, with a speech going after television commentators, the role of the media has drawn increasing criticism out here in America for the last, 50 years. So I think that to have this conversation now is a good thing. Discuss it. Have the president himself discuss it with reporters right there on air for all the American people to see, and then all the rest of us will chime in time. But I think that's a good thing. Lance the boil, as it were. Don't let the resentments pile up on each side and that sort of thing. Get it out there. That's a healthy thing.
Jeffrey,
particularly in democracy.
Jeffrey, Jake Tapper here. Obviously, you're a strong supporter of the president. You have been for years. Obviously, I don't doubt for 1 second that Rush Limbaugh is extolling him. They have similar targets, the mainstream media and others. And I don't doubt that those who supported President Trump, whether enthusiastically or somewhat ambivalently even, liked what they saw, liked what they heard. But what about the majority of the country, the majority of the electorate that did not vote for President Trump? Isn't it a better idea to reach out to those people in some way and reassure them that he is their president as well, and have a different kind of message than the one that with which he won the presidency and the Republican nomination?
Jake, my experience with this kind of thing, just in general, is these people are not going to be supportive of him no matter what he says. If he did everything you suggested and more, they would have contempt for him. They don't like him. They don't like him.
George W. Bush lost the electoral, but George W. Bush won the electoral vote but lost the popular vote in 2000, and then in 2004 he won both. There is a way to bring people who did not vote for you once before on board, to reach out to them, to behave in a way that maybe is not off-putting.
And give him time. Give him time. I mean, he's been there, less than a month. I mean, people are going to have to the people who don't like him are going to have to get used to his style. And he is a very charming guy. He is a very persuasive person. People like him. And the best thing he can do is just be himself and be open and have more encounters like he did today.
Let me ask you also, Jeffrey, there was a moment where President Trump claimed that he had won the biggest electoral college victory since Ronald Reagan. You are a student of history, so I know that you knew that that was not true when he said it. George H.W. Bush, Clinton, Obama, five others.
He was talking about Republicans. In fairness, I do think he was talking about Republicans.
Well, even with Republicans, George H.W. Bush had a bigger one. But the larger point that the reporter from NBC brought up was, you're calling us fake news, and yet you are saying things that are not true. How do you have credibility to call us fake news?
I think it was a simple mistake. And Jake, again, in fairness, I think this is the problem that so many people have with the news media, is that they'll zero in on some little nitpicky thing like that and make a major event out of it. I had somebody here locally say to me during the campaign, they recognized me and they came over and they said, and it was a comment about CNN, which I'll be happy to make on air here, just so you know. And they said if Donald Trump sneezed, CNN would spend 4 days talking about his damage to the environment. That's the kind of perception, not just about CNN, but about the media writ large. And that's the kind of feeling that he addresses. And what you're talking about there, I think, is a good example of it.
Jeff, hold on for a moment. Our political director, David Chalian, is with us as well. And talk a little bit about this very different impression that people are getting from the hour and 15-minute news conference that the President of the United States just had, because Jeffrey makes a very good point. His supporters out there, I'm sure, were loving it. His critics were not.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey is right about these two sides of the country are never going to come together on Donald Trump's style. I think that's true. I think this is exactly the Donald Trump that 46% of the country kind of fell in love with throughout the election. There's no doubt about that. But I do wonder, what about governing and accomplishing what you set out to govern? How do you do that? How do you, beyond the style, now on the substance, how do you go about as president, as the leader, to accomplish all of these things that you have promised on the campaign trail, to govern the country as a whole and get those accomplishments without broadening your appeal? That to me is the part that is going to confound his presidency, if all he's doing is appealing to the stylistic enjoyment that his supporters had for him throughout the campaign and certainly still do.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I would suggest that the president himself showed, how he does this. When April Ryan stood up and gave that question about the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, he immediately said, well, go set up the meeting. And she said, she's a reporter, and I understand all of that. But in other words, his willingness to meet with the Congressional Black Caucus telegraphs right there that he's willing to sit down with people who oppose him and have a conversation and try and find some area of agreement and move forward. I mean, that's exactly the kind of person he is. There he is during the transition meeting with Al Gore, for heaven's sakes. He is not afraid to sit down with people who oppose him. So, I mean, that is the first way you get to substance, to get accomplishment, is you sit down with other people. And let's remember that when President Obama summoned, I think it was the House Republican leadership early on in his administration, and they're trying to talk to him about ideas, he looked across the table at him and said, well, I won. Well, I don't know that that was particularly helpful, but I mean, Donald Trump is going to have people in the room that disagree with him, and he's going to talk to them and try and find common ground. That does not mean that he will yield on what he thinks is principle. He will stick with principle, just like Ronald Reagan did, or in fairness, President Obama, when he felt he was on principle and he wanted to stick with something. So I think he's doing it, and I think that answer to April on the CBC is a small indication of exactly how this works.
Let me interrupt, Jeff, but what does it say to you that April Ryan, who's a reporter, longtime reporter at the White House, I've known her for many years, a terrific woman, the President of the United States asks her to try to set up a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus leadership? Well, apparently, his staff or at least the Congressional Black Caucus, they don't want to deal directly with them. I don't know what the answer is. I'm going to be speaking later today in the Situation Room with Congressman Elijah Cummings. What does it say to you that the president can't get a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus organized?
Well, it sounds to me from what he said that Congressman Cummings didn't want to meet him because he was afraid of the political criticism he'd get at home. And there are people like this. I mean, all you have to do is watch these Hollywood celebrities who tentatively voice the opinion that